George Orwell was a man who understood how nations who don't value freedom looks like, because authoritarian nations, they have to crack down on the people, and that cracking down is pretty much universal. There's a quote-unquote correct way to do it, which George Orwell identified it, and he criticized both the Nazis and the communists, and one of his greatest works is considered to be the book 1984. And if you haven't read it, you really should, because it draws very interesting parallels with a lot of things that are happening today. Not going to give you much spoilers than that, but if you haven't read it, again, you really should, or at least watch the movie. There are two movies regarding 1984, and both of them are really great. Now, it seems that there's going to be a retelling of the book, because the book tells us the story from the perspective of Winston, the male character, and the retelling is going to tell us the story from the perspective of Julia. And while this sounds interesting, I personally think that it's going to be shit. Because there's just two possibilities. Number one, the author doesn't have any self-esteem. They don't think that they can write something original, a new IP based in a new universe, and sell. They lack the confidence that they're going to get the recognition unless they piggyback on something that's already popular. Orwell didn't piggyback on anyone. He just wrote something that he believed in, and it turned out to be a masterpiece. This author is just leeching on the fame of Orwell. And maybe they're doing it for the money, maybe they're doing it for the publicity, but it just doesn't feel like it's an artist which has something to show to the world and wants that work to stand out of its own. It's just a leecher, if you will. The other possibility is that the artist is creatively bankrupt or lazy, and they don't know how to create their own universe, they don't know how to create their own IP, so they just have something that's already done to make their job more easy. Now, I can't name many sequels, prequels, reimaginings which came out recently, which ended up actually being good. Feel free to name me a couple which came in the last 3 years, because let's be honest, it's only sequels, prequels, reimaginings which happen to appear now. Like, very little originality is there to be had in the entertainment industry, unfortunately. But I personally can't think of many. In fact, I am struggling really hard to think of one, and I just can't do it. And this is due to the fact that the people writing these aren't artists that are creative individuals and want to express themselves. They are just creative hacks which lack originality, and worse off, they're money-hungry individuals who think entertainment can be created on an assembly line. It doesn't have any soul, doesn't have any passion. But with that said, in this particular case, it's even more interesting when you actually see what the author wants Julia, Winston's lover, to be like. In some ways, she is far more acute than Winston, and far less susceptible to the party propaganda. She also stirred a sort of envy in him by telling him that during the 2 minutes of hate, her great difficulty was to avoid bursting out laughing. But she only questioned the teachings of the party when they in some way touched upon her own life. Often she was ready to accept the official mythology simply because the difference between truth and falsehood didn't seem that important to her. She'd known no other world until she meets Winston, never imagined one. She's opportunistic, believing in nothing and caring none at all about politics. She routinely breaks the rules, but also collaborates with the regime when necessary. She's an ideal citizen of Oceania. Now, the shocking thing is that the author wants to write a feminist retelling. So you need to make a difference between having a novel that has a female as a protagonist versus a feminist retelling. A novel which has a feminist as a protagonist is just that. It tells the story from the perspective of a woman. Meanwhile, a feminist story tries to portray the characters as examples of a demographic. It's why they call representation. It's because the female character represents an ideal. It represents all women. Right? So, looking at what the author is trying to say is that the women are villains. Because if Julia understands what is party propaganda, she knows that the regime is evil. She knows that there is massive income disparity. She knows that people are suffering. She knows that the regime fakes wars in order to maintain itself into power and chooses to do absolutely nothing unless it interferes with her personal life. In fact, she even chooses to collaborate with the regime. How is this a positive person? I mean, clearly, without people like Julia, the regime wouldn't be able to exist. It would not have collaborators, and everyone would treat the regime as hostile. But Julia treats the regime as, well, it's out there, I can't do anything about it. Now, it's not that she just chooses not to act, but it's the fact that she's even collaborating with it. It's the fact that she's actually trying to help the regime. And I guess reading from The Guardian, the negative character is Winston, who is ruining Julia's life. If it wasn't for Winston, he wouldn't drag her down the rabbit hole, he wouldn't make her ask questions, and she wouldn't get in trouble with the regime. So, I don't know why you call this to be a feminist novel when you're going to portray the main character as a villain, and the example that you're setting is like, well, if it doesn't really affect your personal life, then don't care about it. Don't worry about that in the future. You're giving so much power to the regime that it can affect your life whenever it wants. It can just make you disappear like it made Winston disappear. It can turn your children against you like the Orwellian regime in 1984 was doing. You have absolutely no control over even the most basic human thing, which is sex, because the regime was trying to make a drug so people can't experience the orgasm, because they didn't want people to get attached to other human beings. They wanted to get attached to Big Brother. So don't worry about any of that, unless it actually affects your life. I guess that's the thing, right? Like when it actually started affecting the sex life, and it's like taking away the orgasm, then it's when she realized, oh, this might be a little bit worse than I thought. So I haven't read the book because it's not out there. But from the presentation that The Guardian is giving, from what they are saying that the author is trying to accomplish, I mean, I don't know. I guess it would be a very good book, but not for the reason you think. It would be a great book because it would show that a regime that's brutal and authoritarian can only exist with people like Julia. It can only happen if certain people that know everything around them is bullshit, but choose not to talk about it, choose not to say anything about it. And in this case, it's not even out of fear. I guess it's just out of convenience. Then yeah, I mean, it might actually be a great book. It might actually be something that I would recommend to people to read. And by the way, this funny thing has happened during communism as well. When we had socialism back in my country, the communists commissioned a lot of books and a lot of movies, some of them dealing with income inequality, for example, and how greedy people profit from the weak. And they were supposed to be anti-capitalistic. They were supposed to turn people against capitalism, but the books were written in such a way that it actually turned people against communism. Because in socialism, the system we were having, you had a small group of people having a lot, and having so much while everyone else was starving. So you have the income inequality, and you also had a very small group of people, aka the party members, that were controlling everything, and they were enriching themselves at the expense of the rest of the population. So every now and then it just so happens that some ideologue might try to push a book or a movie that is supposed to be about one thing, but when people read it, they're like, hold on a little bit. You're just describing yourself and your ideology, aren't you? So maybe we're going to witness that case happening here, and I'll actually be interested in reading this book when it's coming out. But hey, let me know what you guys think, and I'll see you in the comment section. Take care.